and we're so delighted that you were able to join us here this evening for tonight's discussion with Travis Alabanza. I hope you're having a wonderful Pride Week here at Virginia Tech. Woohoo! Yeah, you can say that. Woohoo! Absolutely. It's a very full series of weeks here in celebration. Before we begin tonight's program, and on behalf of the Moss Arts Center, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge and pay respect to the Tutelo and Monacan people, who are the traditional custodians of the land that Virginia Tech presently is located on. Additionally, I want to take a moment to acknowledge those who were indentured and enslaved and whose labors built this institution. We pay respect to them as well for their forced contributions to Virginia Tech. Tonight's program, this discussion with Travis Alabanza, is presented in part with support from a co-sponsor, which is the Amici series of the Center for European Union, Transatlantic, and Trans-European Space Studies, which is a Jean Monnet Center here at Virginia Tech. I'd like to say a huge thank you to the center, as well as specifically Esther Bauer, who serves as the chair of the Arts and Cultural Committee of that center, for supporting tonight's program. Additionally, I'd like to take a moment to thank Dr. Ashley Bingham and the LGBTQ+ Resource Center. Yeah, I love it. You can clap for each other, absolutely. They've served as a sponsor for the run of burgers here at Virginia Tech that Travis Alabanza will be performing in. And last but not least, I'd like to invite you to join me in showing our appreciation to Dr. S. Moon Casanelli, who is moderating tonight's discussion with Travis. Tonight's talk is presented in conjunction with Travis's performance of Burgers here at Virginia Tech, which is going to be running Friday at 7:30 p.m. and Saturday at 4 and 7:30. Now, the Friday night show has already sold out, so if you don't have your tickets yet, I would highly encourage you to move quickly to grab those tickets for Saturday. Now, I promised our guests that I would not bore you all with a lengthy recitation of their very impressive bios, which I have to admit is very hard. And also, in an effort to try to make tonight's program sort of more conversational or more intimate, I'd encourage you, since this is a really big space, if you feel comfortable moving a little bit closer to the apron of the stage, yeah, you can grab your stuff, you can move while I'm talking. I'd invite you to do so it can feel a little bit more like an intimate conversation. So I'm going to keep these bios brief. First and foremost, Travis Alabanza, our guest. Travis is a UK-based theater maker, writer, and performer. Dr. S. Moon Casanelli, who's serving as our moderator, is an assistant professor here at Virginia Tech in the Department of English. Please join me in welcoming Travis Alabanza and Dr. S. Moon Casanelli.
Hello, everyone. Good evening. How's everybody doing? Good. Okay. So I do have one announcement. If you happen to be an English student, the department purchased complimentary tickets for Saturday's show, the 4 p.m. show of Burgers. And you were told that you can pick up your complimentary ticket after tonight's event at the box office, but the box office is closed already. So if you are going to use a complimentary ticket from the English department, you want to show up and ask for that ticket at the box office on Saturday. Okay? All right, excellent. Well, I'm so pleased to be moderating this conversation with Travis, who's an amazing artist, writer, poet, theater maker, and we are so fortunate to have you. Okay. Some things that we are going to be talking about tonight have to do with queer art making, trans art making, trans politics, and expression and resistance and survival. And I am also deeply invested in those topics, not as an artist per se, but as a scholar. So hopefully there'll be plenty of opportunity to kind of go back and forth. Okay, so I'm just going to begin. Travis, in your past work, especially I'm thinking of your poetry, like Before I Step Outside, You Love Me, you've talked about locating an archive and why that was so influential to your work. So can you share a little bit about the process of what locating an archive is for you?
Yes. First, I want to say hi. I have to name that because I'm in such a huge space for such a small and intimate talk, and that's because they're putting up burgers next door. So it's like really weird to have this convo whilst also being in this. I mean, it's great. So if I zoom out this way, that's what I'm doing. And thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here. And I know everyone says that. I was talking with my director, Sam. There's certain places that when you go and tour, it's not an honor because you're like, well, I go there to go and club and party anyway. But there is something about being in a place where I really know that I would have never, and I don't mean this in a rude way, I would have never have bought a flight to Renoke ever in my life. And so it makes it an honor because it's because of my art and your invitation that I'm here. So thank you so much. That is the only, I can't promise that'll be the only time I sidetrack your question. Why I make an archive, why I'm invested in the archive, right? Yeah, so I think, look, I didn't become an artist to be an artist. I actually didn't call myself an artist even like 3 years and 4 years into my career when everyone was calling me one. I did it because it was my way of expressing myself. Yeah. I grew up in social housing and in an environment that didn't have art near me. And when I found an open mic center, I realized that this was a place where people could listen to you. And so I became obsessed with figuring out other people that were maybe like me that had previously used art to also have them be heard. And it was weird growing up because everyone always wonders if you like had this deep dark moment where you thought you were wrong. And I know for a lot of queer and trans people, particularly those of us racialized, they do have that. I didn't have that, so I can't lie and say I did. What I did have was this feeling that I was like the only one. So I didn't think I was wrong, but I genuinely thought that no one else was like a black Filipino cross-dresser, right? And I use cross-dresser in the sense that I am trans, but I like sometimes just saying cross-dresser to fuck with them. And I used the archive and Google. Remember, I was a kid coming up just when the internet was also having a little bit of a moment. Yeah. So I really used Google. And for me, the library and the Google and the archive was a way of going, you may feel like the only one on your council estate, which is what we call like the projects, but you're not actually. Right. There were other people here. Yeah. And so I only really exist because of the archive. I think I sped up my understanding of myself and my queerness and the language I used because of the archive. Like when I met other queer people my age, they were like figuring out their terms and their identities and their words then. And I think I had already kind of done that because I'd found all these other people in the books.
Yeah, that's so amazing because I think often we hear the word archive and we think of a very formal collection, a body of work that's been curated by a third party, and it references the past. It references time before. And for myself, this pertains to me personally, also my research, which includes transnational adoption. I didn't know how to locate myself in a previous moment than the present. I didn't know a lot about my family, per se. I knew that I was adopted and I had my adopted family, but I was so intimidated by looking into history and not seeing myself reflected back, or the risk that I would look and there would be no one looking back. And I hear that in what you're saying, that you also were driven by, I want to see, I want to verify, I want to connect. And sometimes when it comes to being adopted, there isn't someone biologically related to you looking back per se, but that doesn't mean that I didn't find people and I didn't find connection. And so there's also a really ephemeral archive that exists, especially for queer and trans and of color individuals, and it's finding people like you, and that like you can mean so much. It sounds like an associative thing to say, like, oh, like me but not me, but it's actually so empowering. It does so much more than just kind of reference someone similar. It gives you it gave me a groundedness. And so I really appreciate that. There's a scholar I use, a South Asian scholar. Her name is Gayatri Gopinath. And she talks about a queer curatorial process that is all about recognition. And so even when you see someone in the archive who you don't know personally, if there's something about them that is queer and something that's effectively there for you, then there can be a gaze of recognition. And I think that's so powerful because we deal with other people's views of us so often. And so to feel a recognition that is kind of directed through something other than judgment is just, it can be really powerful. You've also talked about seeing yourself as an archive. Did that come later after searching for your own archive?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think it would be quite arrogant if I was at 17 being like, I'm my own archive. I think it came from when it came actually after the first time I watched how I was being reviewed, not with burgers, but I was kind of my first time being in the press. There's a punk film by Derek Jarman, who I'm not sure if he ever got big over here, but in the UK, Derek Jarman was quite an influential artist and queer maker, and he made a film called Jubilee that kind of became like a cult classic in the UK for queer kind of punk making. They did a remake of that in theatre, and it was quite a big deal, and I played the lead that was in the film played by a cis white woman, and they kind of wanted to do edgy casting, and they played me, which I was really grateful for. It was a great role, great opportunity, and I remember that how they reviewed me was really annoying. It was great positive reviews. I got it helped my career and all that stuff that people are meant to care about. But the way they talked about me was so reductive, you know? It was like every compliment had trans before it, like amazing comedy, trans comedy, amazing trans command of the stage, trans performance dialogue, trans monologue, and or it was like Travis, who uses them, they pronouns, and then Travis, he did this. It was just like a mess. It was a mess because the UK is behind even in terms of America in terms of representation, but even more so in press. And it was that when I realized I had to be in charge of my own archive,
Right.
because if I left it up to everyone else in the press, I would be archived inaccurately. And I think about some of our heroes and our legends in our movement who have been archived inaccurate, that word.
Yes.
You know, I think of Marsha P. and Sylvia and how their identities have been harrowed as like, or flattened, I'm just gonna say it, flattened to like trans women of color, whereas when you read how they speak about themselves, they have so many other words for their gender.
Right.
Right, but when people archive someone else, their bias and goal for what it means to then use certain words creeps in, unintentionally or intentionally, and that carries on. And I thought about how it's a lie that there was no other black trans artist before me. That's not true in the UK, of course there was. But I remember how it felt when I was looking for some in the UK and how hard it was to find them. And then when I later found them, it was through connections and access that I could get to that part of the archive. And I said, I don't want that. I want to have young black trans people be able to Google black trans artist UK and my archive for myself comes up. And so it was a real determination. It means I sacrificed maybe anonymity. I can't say that word, you're a scholar, say it, anonymity.
Anonymity?
That one. I had to sacrifice that, and I had to sacrifice some like maybe chillness. I had to be unchill, right? Because you're going against UK media, like and how they want to talk about you. But what I gained was, I believe, a really extensive way for people to find me. And I know that because I get lots of messages and invites to talk at UK universities and references built into an archive, you know, and I knew that when they've just released a Black British selection of like Black British plays across history. And it's a collection of books, and they've gone through like the 60s to now. And I'm one of two artists in the now, and it's the only trans artist in there. And I don't think that's because my work is better than any trans artist that's came before me, not whatsoever. It's just because I've archived it so heavily that they have to put it in there. Do you know what I mean? And then that's putting it in their archive, which means now when someone reads the Black British History book that normally has erased trans people, they have to read Burgers in there. It's a tactic, you know?
It is, and it's an understanding of a politics of representation and using visibility to your own, strategically, as you're saying, a tactic, because you are so, you have spoken on more than one occasion on how visibility is a trap.
Of course.
For trans people, especially of color, and for queer people, and so then to use the politics of representation in that way is really powerful. Do you want to speak a little bit on how you have to negotiate the fact that visibility is a trap?
Well, look, I think that people assume when they see trans feminine, particularly trans feminine people, that we chose this visibility, right? There's lots of judgments about, I think it's really interesting. I'm not smart enough to kind of go into like how I think the trans influencer has been like demonized whilst also, I think, separate to a non-trans influencer, is because the reason I think it's separate is because trans people don't have a choice about visibility, right? We're already visible. So it's this myth that like we opt into visibility because looking like this, there are certain jobs I just can't do, right? I can't do insert anonymity. I cannot say that word and I use it all the time. That word, I can't do that, right? Because I look like this. I can't go into an office job and not be discreet. Discretion isn't an option when you're gender non-conforming. And so that is the first thing to like point out, is that visibility has already been thrusted upon us. Susan Stryker actually told me once on a talk, she was like, before, I don't want to misquote, but this is a loose quote, Susan Stryker said, before trans people had an option between sex work, now they have an option between sex work, TV, and the college circuit. And I thought it was great, because it was like really summed up how like, because of our, it looks more glamorous now, but it's actually still just using the same tools from what we had a choice to do. People go, why are you on stage? I was like, well, where else? Like genuinely, where else can you do this and be celebrated and safe? And so I think that's why I think it's a trap, because we celebrate all these moments, but I wonder where the consent was. I instead celebrate trans people, particularly trans feminine people, making the best out of a bad sitch, right? You know, Laverne Cox's visibility is on my mind today. I don't know why I keep on repeating it to different people, but I'm celebrating that she did the best of what she wants to be an actress. And in any other world, she would have had a starring role in Orange is the New Black and not have then become an emblem for every trans person in America. But because visibility is a trap, she had to be. And so I don't celebrate her visibility, I celebrate what she's done with the thrust of visibility on her, right? She didn't have a choice, but I celebrate what she's done with that lack of choice.
Yeah, and I think that's so important, because I think there is a lot of conversation in trans and queer politics about making things safer. And before we can even make things safe, and before, I think we have to be honest and have explicit conversations about what visibility does and how that is thrust upon. And if somebody does make, makes good use and opens doors for other people, that is great, but it's also, it's a complication, certainly. And I see you working with that in your work, so now I'm thinking of burgers. And so one of the things that I love about it is I see your stage work as asking your cisgender audience to look at how the world has naturalized them, has constructed their place in the world as unquestioned. And I'm wondering if for you that is, on one hand, a reverse gaze, because trans people are so often used to having the gaze, they have to navigate the gaze all the time. Like, so G-A-Z-E.
But also G-A-Y-S. Always both.
Thank goodness we're multitaskers.
I'm always navigating the gaze. Even in Virginia, it's like, ooh.
And so I wonder if you see it as a reverse gaze, like your eyes are not just on me, but there are eyes on you. As actually, I saw it as a path towards empathy.
Yeah,
And
you've done it.
oh, thank you. All right, we're done.
We're done. Sorry, carry on, but I'm just like, yeah, that's the point.
No, I would love to, but empathy plus accountability, like two sides of the coin.
It's as if you were in the rehearsal room. It didn't start out like that. Shout out to my director, Sam, who, when I presented Burgers at first, was like, this is great, but what are you searching for in this? Like, what is your questioning? It's not exciting to present. And bear in mind, when I made Burgers, I hadn't made any long-form work yet.
Yeah.
Like, it's easy talking about it now because I've now made a lot of long-form work. So I can go, oh, this wasn't working, so I did this and this. But at the time, I didn't know really how to construct a piece of work. It was really Sam and Hackney Showroom that kind of taught me how to craft work, right? Saw like a spark and said, this is how work could work. Work. And Sam was like, you're not questioning anything. And the question I kept on coming back to, or we found eventually, was how do you build trust / care / empathy for a white man? Because the work I was making was like bam, 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 which is fine, and I get why people do it, but I don't think it's hopeful. And that's not to say I need respectability. I don't need you in your day-to-day interactions to like revere white people. But I actually think if I'm making art, it's about imagination. It's very easy to imagine a world where a racialized person doesn't like a white person. Yeah. The world creates that already. But Burgers was trying to see if I could actually create a relationship with a man and trust him. And so there is the empathy, but it's done by restructuring the gaze, which is why it's so interesting you picked up on that, because normally someone will ask me what's Burgers about, and then I come back with your question as my answer. But it is that. It's that people are so used to looking at us, and then we go on stage and we kind of invite that because we're on stage. And so I was like, how do I make a show that isn't really about me, right? People call it an autobiographical piece of work, and that's fine, but I actually don't think it is. I think it's really the other person on stage, for me, has way more that the audience learns about them than me, you know? And I wanted to make a show where people couldn't be passive in learning about transness. And this came because I was watching a lot of trans theatre, or I was researching queer and trans theatre. I was going to and seeing them because by this point I was only working in the clubs. So I don't say only, I was working in the clubs. It's a great place to work. But I knew I wanted to like make long form work. And so I researched and I went to shows, and everything was fine, but it was also me, I, which is important. That self-confessional work is really an important part of building queer and trans work. But I actually don't have any reckoning to make with my transness, like really, like if I'm honest. I feel very calm about it. It's the world that doesn't. So why would I make a show that focuses on me and my like journey with my transness? It's actually been quite a boring journey. I learned about the word trans and I was like, that fits. And then I learned that there was people, and I know this isn't the same for everyone else, but it really was for me. I learned that there was people that wear women's clothing that weren't giving women at birth. I realized that was me. I started going out in women's clothing. Bingo. I then found like non-binary and was like, yeah, sure. And it's everyone else that I'm obsessed with because they're obsessed with me. Everyone else makes it the issue. So why would I make a show about me when I'm not the interesting thing here? What's interesting is I go outside and a burger's thrown at me and no one does anything. Like, what's not interesting is how I decided to go outside. There's loads of fashionable people in the world. And I just happen to be one of them. So, yeah, it is about returning the gaze. And that's why people find it uncomfortable / interesting, is because I think cisgender people, this is a huge generalization, but you generalize us, so it's fine. They're so comfortable with learning about us when we go like this, but not about when it's in relation to them, you know? Like, actually, what if you made me trans? What if actually only because cisgender people exist am I trans? What if actually I wouldn't have noticed this, but because of you and the world and how it's set up, I am now thinking about this? What if actually you have responsibility in my gender? We see gender as this separate personal thing, and that's bullshit to me. Like, it's not true. And again, there are some trans people that disagree. What's beautiful about being people is we don't have to be like homogenous. I don't think it's an A. I don't think it's this like deep burden within me that was born this way. Yeah. I think I was born and then this way happened to me and now I'm like this. And so why then, when we're figuring out our gender, does it become a trans issue?
Right.
When they all have responsibility in my gender. I have responsibility in theirs. Gender is a communal project.
It is.
You know?
And everybody constructs their gender. Cisgender, transgender.
Right.
Non-binary, agender, without gender. It is a relational project. And, you know, I think I think that's so important because I think in some ways we know that conversation along race lines.
Yeah.
About, you know, I can't give you the narrative that you want. You can't expect me that I'm the wounded one speaking to, you know, an only white audience, for instance, right? Because it's in relation to each other. Because as as much as I tell my students that we're all constructing our gender repeatedly, we're committing to a gender over and over again, or committing to the idea of gender, it's also the same conversation of like, and whiteness is a race, right? Because we all like participate in this. And that connection you're right, it can get the isolation of the me and the I in the narrative can diminish or minimize the connection that's kind of flying around the room all the time. And so I would love to talk about how funny Burgers is. That it has some truly, genuinely hilarious moments in it. And I will posit, it's because gender is funny. It is a complicated but also very simple thing. And you know, Travis and I were talking about this earlier today. Being trans is sometimes absurdly funny, darkly funny. Like, yes, partially because all you can do is laugh, but because also, you know, we live in a world where a binary has been created by colonialism and white supremacy, and it forces us into these circumstances that are deemed natural or orderly, and in fact, like, you know, the gender binary is kind of like ridiculous for all of us. So, but, you know, I would love to hear you talk a little bit more about the humor of the play.
Well, I love that you said that gender's funny because it is, right? I don't know if the gender reveal videos, those are hilarious. I saw one recently where like they got it wrong. I love watching the ones where they get it wrong.
I know,
and you see
I do
the person be like,
too.
no. And they'd booked like a truck, like a truckload, like 6 different like trucks basically that were painted blue, and they drove past with blue steam, like going through to be like, this baby's gonna be a boy. And it was like driving past, and I was like, this is so hilarious. Like, surely the kid's got a college fund that this could go to. And then the wife is like, no, it's actually a girl. Yeah. And they all start crying because they're so upset. And I'm like, come on, that's so funny. Like, come on, you've literally just got like these blue cars to drive past to signify this marker of this kid that you don't know yet. Like, it's truly hilarious. I mean, less hilarious because I think people got hurt, but wasn't there that rumor that one of the fires that happened in 2020 was actually started by a gender reveal party? I mean,
yes.
Ooh,
yeah.
Like, if we're talking about symbolism, like, ooh, you know, it's like weird. It's weird. I went to my friend's kid party thing, and like, this is my friend who's like pretty queer, like has been around queer people, is queer themselves, is like landed with a straight man, we mourn, but it's like in it. And I went and like, she was just like, as soon as she got into baby mode, was like loving all the pink gifts for her, and suddenly her brain went to like this mode, and she left, and she's like, I don't know what's happened, and she looked at her 2 trans friends and was like, sorry, and then we were like, Girl, it's not our baby, you do whatever you need to do. This is just funny that like gender can do this, like make you forget like years of queer parties because you've got a thing that says it's a girl, like powerful vibes. Forgot the question. Humor, yeah. Well, look, I'm funny. So like, if I'm making a show about myself, I have to then put me in it. But more than that, I think that comedy... Look, what's the point in going on stage if you're going to be exactly the version of themselves that they already expect? Because then why are we going on stage? If stage is about imagination, if stage is about playing with things, if stage is about exploring things, then we also have to explore the types of people that they're used to seeing. People are used to seeing trans people in pain. They're used to seeing trans people angry. They're used to seeing trans people asking and begging for acceptance. It's not to say that these trans people are wrong for doing that. A cis world puts us in that place. But if I have an hour on stage where I can escape those things, why don't I show what it looks like when a trans person doesn't actually require your acceptance, isn't begging for it, and is actually like darkly funny? Like, that's really interesting to me. And I think humor also gets people on side. You know, if we're talking about an audience, I knew that when I made the show, I didn't want it to just play to queer people. I didn't think that it would live this long and have this much of a life. But I'd hoped that it wouldn't just be in the venue that we lent in. I loved the venue, but it was a queer venue, bringing in my audience, and I did have a dream for it to go to a wider audience.
Yeah.
And comedy is something that bonds that. Comedy is also a skill that kind of transgresses identity. You either make people laugh or you don't. A joke either lands or it doesn't. A joke doesn't stop and go, hold on a minute, what identity are you before, like, it's funny or not. You either want to laugh. And so what I loved about doing this show, especially when it got to points where it was in like places that maybe weren't used to seeing people like me, is I could tell, I come out and their arms are crossed and they are not ready to enjoy themselves. They don't know which person got them this ticket. They've been told, there was a point in Edinburgh Fringe where like people were coming because they'd been told it was the show to go to, but you could tell they didn't want to be there. They were just like, I have to go here because it's the cool show to be at. And they will sit there. But you make them laugh, and then that gets them in. You know, and that tells them like, okay, bish, whatever you think about me, whatever, but I just made you fucking laugh. So now we're game, you know? And so that's important for me in burgers. Also, it's about, I hate to bring up Dave Chappelle, but Dave Chappelle's Netflix thing. It's about power and comedy, right? Trans people have been the butt of jokes for so long, you know, and we have been a victim to so many bad jokes that I find it so liberating to be able to turn that joke on the man and push it, right? I do push it sometimes to a level where someone goes, oh, is that kind? And I love that line because I'm not sure if it is kind at that point. I have pushed it far, but I like to then go, oh, but it's comedy, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's a free range, you know, we're allowed to do whatever, like they do when it's jokes about us. I really enjoy that because it's about power, you know. There's not a comedy special from trans people on Netflix taking the piss out of cis people, but there is one of a cisgender person using trans people as the butt of their jokes. So we'll allow that to then happen on stage for a bit and be all right with it. You know, I'm all right with the white man getting a bit uncomfortable during my show, and I'm all right with him having a slight feeling. You know, I do build him up. We'll see in the show. I don't want to give too many spoilers, but like, I do build him up too, like it's all done safely. But he does experience what it feels like for everyone to laugh at him for a second, you know? And then I save it, and then you know, it's always haha and then back.
Yeah.
But for that slight moment, he does experience, what, 100, 200, 300, however many people are in the room for them to laugh at, and that is kind of what I experience when I walk outside.
Yes.
So my sympathy is there, but I'm like, in order for us to get to the end of the show where we build empathy for each other, I think you have to experience what it feels like to be looked at and to be laughed at. And yours will go away, but mine will continue when I leave. You know?
Yeah. I think a lot about, as somebody who works on ethnic American lit, Asian American literature, feminist literature, something that I hope, you know, is that we get past the idea that there's an authentic story to tell. Because an authentic story to tell is a single story. And it is used as a measure or a ruler against all other stories. And then it doesn't allow that kind of tension or playfulness or antagonisms or just emotional interactions that you're talking about. And so, you know, I often get the question of like, well, is this a good Asian American story? Is this a good feminist story? Is this a good story for trans people?
What a boring question.
And it's impossible to answer.
Yeah.
But truly, yes.
Truly boring question. And my God, if anyone called my thing a good feminist story, I'd say, let me rewrite it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then because we're not looking for just good interactions. If we, if that could fix things, we would have fixed things already. And so we are complicated people, and I mean all of us in that we. And so to have these kind of range of experiences that run through burgers and that involves the audience, and it is funny. I mean, there is you do bring the audience in, and you do invite them in an incredibly generous and smart way.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks. And
I gasped. Oh, so I had like a pre-screening, and I was watching it.
It's a gasper, isn't it? I mean, it's gaggy.
I did.
It's a different show every night.
I did, and I because I was watching it on my computer, and I like stopped the computer because I was like.
Because it's real. I mean, people
Yeah.
don't believe. We get asked every time, was that scripted? And I was
Yeah.
like, some of it was.
Yeah.
A lot of it's not. But the good or bad thing I find really interesting, because I do think it's only marginalized, well, not only, but like marginalized work has this whole pressure to hold everyone in their work.
Yeah.
And like people, I remember when burgers first came out, some trans people found it upsetting too. Like, and we're like, you didn't mention this thing, or you didn't say this, or you didn't make me feel good at the end. And I said, that wasn't my goal.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know why we go to a piece of art and assume that the person's goal is to make everyone learn, feel good, leave empowered, challenge this person, empower Whoa!
Yeah.
That's your shit.
Yeah.
That's you putting, and I will say that a lot of those things came from white, queer, and trans people. Interesting what artists get put the burden of having to hold everyone else's emotions in their work.
Right.
What kind of artists are allowed to challenge? And I think about when cis white women's feminist art started coming out and being bold.
Yeah.
And that was a huge moment, right? When I look back, I wasn't alive at the time, but I was a baby at the time. But when I read about it, I'm like, wow, people were pissed off. And now we're very used to it. Now if we saw like a white cis woman at a performance art festival, naked and screaming, we'd be like, yeah, go on, archiving to this back. But back at the time, that was a thing. And I think there's a similar tension in trans art where there's like this expectation for us to do things. I'm like, why don't you let us be daring? Why don't you let us not wrap everything up? Why don't you let us piss you off? Why don't you let us be confused?
Right.
Because we go to non-profits to wrap everything up. We go to activism to do these things. But we're allowed as trans artists to not give all the answers.
Right.
And we're allowed for everyone, trans or cis, to feel uncomfortable. White trans people feel uncomfortable when they leave my show. And those have often been the people, and I'm saying this because on record, because I can't wait to put this out in the UK. I've never been able to say this out loud on record or on archive, and I'm thinking about the archive now, is that some of the biggest pushback to my show at the beginning was from other white, queer and trans people. And it was really hard, because I was figuring out why the show was being celebrated and why I'd get these really long worded emails from white, queer and trans people. And I was like, because you don't feel wholly good when you leave the show.
Right.
And you came to trans art to feel empowered. And I'm saying there's something more interesting than empowerment.
Right.
There's something more interesting we can do on stage than leave inspired.
Yeah.
When people say they leave inspired, I'm like, okay, what else did you feel?
Yeah. Hungry?
Yeah, hungry. Hungry from the burger. I mean, yeah, depending on how much spice he uses, yeah.
Truly. So I do want to stay with politics because I think the UK has a very particular battle against trans oppression or oppression against trans people, and we in the US are very much year 2020, 2021 has seen the most amount of anti-trans legislation hit state floors, like state legislative floors. Since 2020, over 100 bills have been put forth, and is a lot of targeting. And so, do you see connections between the UK anti-trans fight and the US fight?
Absolutely, because both are funded by right-wing,
Yeah.
evangelical, all these things. In fact, loads of turf movements in the UK is actually funded by US right-wing evangelical groups.
Yeah.
That was found recently. So there's just that already connection of finance. But I see a connection because it's like started with media and hearsay and fear and debates and thought experiments, and then that turns into legislation, always. And when we're having those thought experiments, cisgender people go, oh, but we're just debating. We need to be able to have these conversations.
Yeah.
And the trans people are going, no, we've seen this before.
Yeah.
These conversations lead to bad things.
This is
And
a
then-
warm-up.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and then the bad things happen and they go, oh, how is this happening? And we
Yeah.
go, we were telling you. And you know, it's the same time these bills are happening in the UK, they've just banned conversion therapy except for trans people.
Wow.
So they've actually put in legislation recently that's just been going on in the UK that conversion therapy is not okay unless you're trans,
Yeah.
then it's okay.
Yeah.
And everyone now is waking up in the UK and going, what, how did this happen? And we're going, babe,
Yeah.
the UK media has been wild to trans people for 6 years. This is the plan.
Yeah.
You change public opinion and then you put in the legislation. It is different. It is different because UK is smaller, so you feel it in a different way. I would say that the US is different because of how states work in the UK, you can pass laws quicker, and the democracy is different. So we're not seeing as many bills go through because we have a centralized government. And so I think it's a different type of fear, you know, but it's still scary.
Yeah.
And I think that you're allowed to not have an answer and go, it's just scary, but not surprising, right?
Yeah.
And I think that it is also different in the UK in the sense that we don't have a trans-led charity, like action group. We have mermaids, but that's not actually led by trans people. Our non-profit structure is really different. Every time I come to the US and work here, I'm always like, wow, there's so many non-profits and so many organizing groups. I'm not saying that all non-profits are great, but like, there's all these groups and money being put into people with trans leadership to combat this. And I think where the UK is maybe struggling is I can't point to like a trans-led opposition to this moment. We're just kind of going, oh, this is scary. And because the UK is smaller and there's less trans people, and it's just less people in general, the opposition happens quicker, and to like things that feel disproportionate. You know, like Burgers was protested by trans people, and it's like, this is a theatre show. And I have a lot of friends that are artists and trans in the US, and when I would get blasted in the press in the UK, you know, and be like on like big pages, double spreads, transphobic articles about me, they're like, that wouldn't have even hit the back page of the news here in the US. Like there's so much going on that wouldn't have even got to like the point where you're on morning television. So it's just a different scale. But I think ultimately it's the Western world moving further to the right, ideologically, you know.
I think a lot about how the current legislation, the attempts are just in targeting against youth, LGBTQ youth, gender nonconforming youth who may or may not be queer and trans, and what can and cannot be said in a classroom. On one hand, there's a lot to be said about, you know, the way it's curtailing, like, what we can talk about and kind of a free speech. But I also just think about how much harder it is for young people who are figuring out who they are and not being able to see a future for themselves and not being able to see what's possible because things are just, they feel scary and they feel like they're getting shut down. And so I'm wondering if you think about Futurity. You speak so well, and I love hearing you talk about archives. And for many, an archive is also a way of looking forward. And I wonder if that's the same for you.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because by building yourself into the archive, you're imagining future people looking at you.
Yeah.
So therefore you're existing in the future.
Yeah.
I also think that, yes, there's like loads of hard stuff happening, but I will say that the way young people are talking about themselves now is even different, and I'm still young, but it's different to like how I was like 15 years, like so different. The words they're using, everything.
Yeah.
And so that makes me have a lot of hope, because even if I somewhat have disagreement about like super young people being so sure of the words they want to use, and like maybe there is a beauty in not having the words at young age or Google because we have to figure it out and be a bit more open.
Yeah.
I'm still so glad because what it shows is that young people, despite all the bills and the stresses, are wanting autonomy. And that means that there's a really incredible, exciting future because people are going gender. I would rather myself. I would rather choice. I would rather autonomy.
Yeah.
You know, I went into a class and I remember I was in a class in the UK and I was like, and you can say your pronouns, and I used an example of what pronouns were. I was like, which, you know, could be he or she or maybe they. And this kid put their hand up and they were like, also there's Z or Zer. And I was like, okay, bitch. I was like, okay, sir. Like, you know, and I was like, this person was like 11.
Yeah.
And I was like, fuck off. I was like, what the fuck? Okay, bitch. And, you know, and then this 12-year-old was talking about chosen family. And, you know, yes, we can laugh and take the piss. I will use it in my comedy sets.
Yeah.
Of course, it's funny. You know, but I'm also like, okay, ha ha ha, but also... First shout.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like this 12-year-old being like, well, my chosen family. I'm like, what? What are you having for tea?
I know,
Like, what are you having
yeah.
for dinner? Sorry, I said tea.
Yeah.
That's an English phrase for dinner. You know,
I love it.
You use it here, tea?
Yeah.
Like for food?
No.
No, that's what I thought. Yeah, I meant what you're having for dinner.
Yeah.
You know, and so that makes me think about the future because what are those people going to be like when they have their identity crisis at 18?
Yeah.
Their identity crisis is going to look very different to me because they're not trying to find the words, they've already found them. So then I think we'll get to a bit of gender anarchy because there's so much gender like autonomy now where it's like I am this, I'm this. And that's in opposition to everyone saying you can't be this, I think. So the young people are like, no, I am this, fuck you. And then they'll have their freak out at 18, 19, because we all freak out at 18 and 19, but theirs won't be about not having the words. They'll be like, I've had the words. So then my future is like, maybe we'll get to an age where like these young people are like, fuck all of this.
Yeah.
And that will look like the 80s, because that's what the archive said it was. I wasn't around then. And then that will look like that time before. And you know, it's this repetitive cycle that is growing in different ways. And so I think we'll see that again, maybe.
Yeah.
And I hope I'm still alive for that. So that makes me think about the future. I want to be alive at a time where, not that none of this exists, but we just care less. I really want us to care less. I think there's so many more trans people in the world than there are using the word. I think that so many more cisgender people are actually trans.
Yeah.
I think that, you know, I think actually trans is a majority.
Yeah.
I think that if we are defining transness by someone that doesn't feel like the gender they were assigned at birth, that I want to get to a point in the future where we're honest about none of us are the gender we were assigned at birth because that was a non-consensual act. And if we're brave enough to think about gender in a liberatory way, we'll realise that it's not serving any of us to be cis. Really, truly.
Yeah.
And it will still be useful to talk about, well, what do you experience in the world? You have privilege because you present this way or present that way. But actually, everyone's gender is far more unstable.
Right.
And currently we're having to create quite harsh lines between trans and cis for organising reasons because we're being oppressed. But I hope for a future where the lines are less stiff and that we can be more honest that all of us are being fucked over by this and all of us have gender insecurity and all of us would be freer if we chilled out around it.
Yeah.
You know?
Yes. Yeah, that reminds me so much of some the times where I've been like, I just want to be boring. I mean, clearly I don't want to be boring.
Yeah, baby, this isn't giving boring.
But I want to not have to overthink certain things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's why I started using the word cross-dresser
Yeah.
again. It feels vintage, you know? I'm like, fuck it, this has all become a bit too intellectual for me now.
Yeah.
Let's just name what we see.
Right. And that is the beautiful thing about language is that as much as we can fight over it and we can use it as a point of conversation to truly understand how we're connecting with each other, there's also so much of it. And I like what you were saying about futurity as feeling relief or knowing that change is going to happen, that it is happening, it's going to continue to happen. And I really try to embrace that too, that because we're not trying to get to, and this is the work of feminists and queer scholars, like, there is no ideal politics. Like, we're just going to continue to change and respond and change and respond. And that's a good thing. That momentum is a good thing because it brings us in relation to each other. And it checks in on each other. It makes sure that everyone's as okay as possible, right? Because we're changing and we're responding and we're asking, like, where's the coalition and where's the solidarity? And yeah. So we do have some time for Q&A, so I'm going to pause us and see. We'd love to hear. I don't have a mic.
If you would, and you hear questions, if you repeat them back, since we can hear your voice, we don't have a mic.
Okay, so there's no mic in the house.
What a grand presumption that there's questions. Maybe we just sit in silence for 15 minutes.
Does anyone have a question? Yes.
I don't know who you are. So
Perfect. Nor do I.
Introduce yourself. I'm having,
My name is Silas Castanelli. I'm an assistant professor here at Virginia Tech in the English department and the Women and Gender Studies department.
And I'm Travis Alabanza. I'm a cross-dresser.
And I've been here. I haven't been on this campus that long, so that might be why. That might contribute to the. But yeah.
So Silas, what's your name? Silas
Castanelli?
Okay. For Travis, I really like the shoes that you're wearing. What type of shoes are they? And also, when you kept saying archive, were you talking about it more as a verb or like that you have a website with?
So for people that couldn't hear, what's your name?
Emily?
Emily asked important questions. One, and I mean this genuinely, where are my shoes from? And two, if I have a website. And I mean archive as a verb, but I also do have a website, Emily. But I mean archive as a way, well, my shoes are from Buffalo. Sorry, that's the important thing, they're Buffaloes. I think you can get them here, I think they're an American shoe brand. And I like Buffalo because they go up to like huge sizes, despite the fact that people think they're feminine. I do have a website, but that's not really what I mean by my archive. What I mean more is that if I relied on just my website, it wouldn't do enough to, when a young trans person Googles me, to come up with other things. And so what I mean about an archive is that I made it as much a part of my artistic practice to speak in public and to talk about things and be recorded and document my work by other people, as important as making the art. And that's not to say artists that don't do that are like bad or worse, but there are artists that choose to just make the work and the focus on the work. When I make my work, I'm thinking about how is it visualized, who's photographing it, does it appear in this magazine, does it appear in that? And people see that as a way of going, I care about an ascension. It's not that, although obviously there's a privilege, it does ascend you to a certain place. But it's more that like, when you Google burgers, my show, you get to see so many different ways that people are talking about it, which means I don't think now burgers will be forgotten. Or it might be, but it won't be for a lot of time. It's still talked about. I mean, we're still here 4 years on from making it. So I mean the website, but I more mean like the magazines, the communication about it, the fact that it brings you here, the fact that it's referenced in books. I think it's on like 32 university syllabus? What's the problem? Syllabi. It's on 32 syllabi in the UK. That's not because it's a better play than anyone else's. It's just because I talked about it a lot. Like genuinely, like it was because I was like so focused on it being archived, and that now it's being taught in syllabi where they don't have any trans voices. So that's what I mean about the archive, really. Yeah. But my website's nice too. Of course.
As a trans femme person going through a gender crisis right now, you kind of talked about not really caring so much about labels. I don't know if you have any advice on that.
So the person asked if they're going through a gender crisis. Me too, baby, it's ongoing. And do I have any advice about not caring about labels? Look, it's got to feel natural to you. And like, it's not about better or worse. This works for me. And I've got friends that sometimes, I've got trans friends that saw how I was responding to my gender and then tried to do the same, and it made them feel like shit. If it feels really important for you that you're called a woman or that you're called non-binary, then that's how it feels for you, and that's important.
Yeah.
I think for me, my advice was that, like, look, I'm quite a cynical person a lot of the time. Cis people can use the right words for us, but they still see me as a man in a dress. You know, like all these people using them, they pronouns for me this week, they think I'm a man. And so I was like, well, why am I bothering with like what they call me when at the end of the day, they're looking at me like a cross-dresser. And I just was like, I can't be bothered to build my life off of them understanding me, because that might be a ever-long activity.
Yeah.
So let me feel myself independent of them.
Yeah.
I can't control them. It's why I don't really, I've been misgendered this week loads. I don't really care. But that's a new thing. You know, 3 years ago, I would have like, the bartender earlier, he was so lovely to me at the hotel. We had a great conversation. I look like this, I think I look great. But he was like, he, him, his, man. I was like, really, girl? This is giving man? But you know, 3 years ago, I would have been like, by the way, my pronouns are they. But I was like, the interaction for me is doing more than that.
Yeah.
And like, that's just where I'm at. And that might be because of, who knows what structure that is for. Maybe if I was in a university around lots of straight people, I would feel more of a need to cling on to it.
Yeah.
But I think now, because I'm in a life where most of my friends are queer, I'm in a relationship with another trans person, you know, my life is around, always T for T, baby. You know, I don't feel the need to battle as much because I feel affirmed in other ways.
Yeah.
Also, these labels change, babe, you know? Like, the words we're using for ourselves now, they weren't using for it then, and it will change. So why not use one that has really lasted the test of time, cross-dresser? I'm really doing this for the camera, because who knows in 20 years how I'll feel about this word. But at this time, I just think it's iconic.
Yeah.
And you know, it's hit or miss with a lot of people at the moment. A lot of my friends are very uncomfortable with how much I'm using it. And I
You see the eyes go down to the corner. Yeah.
I just love it. I think it does loads of things at once. It makes everyone uncomfortable, whilst also really getting to the point, putting me in the power seat, and leaving, like, I'll be like, what's your gender? Cross-dresser. And they're like, I love it. Yeah, so that's where I'm at.
Would you be okay if I also maybe offered up something to say to that
Please,
question?
yeah, please, I've
Would
spoken
you be
loads.
okay if I also offered up? Okay, because I don't want to.
Can I ask one more question on top of that?
Yeah.
But then you go now.
One of my worries with, I think I'm kind of in a similar place where it's like, I don't even know if I necessarily care as much about these, but it's important that I have labels for when I go to defend myself.
Yes.
So that's why I care a lot about
T.
Yeah.
Situational, baby, you're right.
Yeah.
There's sometimes when I will be like, no, you cannot call me, I'm this, this, and this, and this. Yeah, true. When you got to defend yourself, you got to care a bit, play the card a bit, do what you need to do.
Yeah.
But that's on your terms, not on theirs.
Right.
So I think you're already there. You know, like I think you're already at the point, but I'd love to hear it.
For one, I would say never ever feel bad for being able to take advantage of the resources that let you feel good about who you are. So if that is social transitioning and various forms of like dress or hair or, you know, aesthetic, or if it's medical transitioning, like don't feel guilty if you're like, you know what, I'm gonna do this and it's gonna make me feel better. Because I have felt differently about my gender through different forms of transition. And instead of saying like, oh, I can't believe it took that for me to feel okay, I say to myself, I am so glad that that is now how I feel. And so don't let anyone tell you what your journey should be. And I think because there's a public conversation about how much we should be celebrating and, you know, just like transitioning is a thing, but we're not necessarily providing structural support. It can leave us ambivalent, like, should I go for that? Should I somehow be okay without that avenue? But if it's available to you, then go for it, you know? And the other thing is, I really love how you talked about cynicism, because I think there's a wide range of emotions attached to feeling comfortable. And we sometimes get into the idea that comfort and confidence only comes at positive emotions, and comfort and confidence come at a variety of emotions. Yeah.
So glad that's on the board
And
too.
that totally coincides with the situationalness.
Yeah.
Because sometimes something can happen and you're like, you know what? Final straw today.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna be snarky and be like, look, these are my pronouns. And I know I might not interact with you again, person at the gas station, but
It matters in this
it
moment.
matters. It
Yeah.
matters, and I think it is on your terms on when it matters. And there's a lot of belief about somehow getting there without any assistance, and that is such. It's a particularly American kind of characteristic. It's built up into our individualism and our capitalism, but this goes back to what we were saying is we're actually so enmeshed in a highly relational experience together that it's all the more reason that you get to decide when it matters and how it matters, and then just find your people who, when you tell them that, they say, "I hear ya." And there will be good days and bad days, but that doesn't mean that you're not determining it on your terms. You are. Yeah. So, thanks
Shame.
for that.
No, that's shame.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just one more question? We just ran right up to time.
No one ever wants to take the last question, but it's also awkward if there isn't a last question. So just think about that.
Uh-huh.
This question is for Travis. So I know we're looking at burgers right now, but you told me that your next several projects you're not in, projects that you have written, developing. Can you tell us about that transition from being the one on stage to creating characters on stage who aren't played by you?
Yeah, thank you so much. So to repeat for people that can't hear, the question was about a lot of my work in the next 2 years doesn't have me in it. How does it feel to go from someone that writes for themselves to writing for other people? What made that transition, etc. It feels so good. One, I can do more things at once because I don't have to be there to do it. Things can exist without me. It was an economic decision at first, I'll be honest, for both myself but others. My platform was rising in the UK. I was realizing that I was being asked by a lot of places, so what's next? We want to fund you to do something. And I had a chance to go economic in two ways. If you just perform in the UK, you're not going to earn you could earn enough, but I wanted to earn more, I'll be honest. But also two, I could create jobs for other people, really, truly. I think about Janet Mock all the time. I'm not trying to be that, I'm not saying I'm on that level, but I was just like, how Janet Mock created an economy for trans people. Like, the UK, I don't know how to describe it in terms of the US, like, we don't have a Pose, right? We don't have a show like Pose. We don't have trans actors that are like on the red carpet. We have trans actors, but there's not like the trans celebrity class in the UK. Like, I count as that, and trust me, it's not the same. It's not on that level. Like, I would be counted. Like, you type trans celebrity UK, it's me. It's not like a Laverne Cox, Janet Mock. Like, we don't have that. And I was thinking about, not that I wanted to build trans millionaires, that's not what I want to do, just to make that clear. But I was like, I could make jobs for people because suddenly I'm being asked what I want to make. I can create trans opportunity where people can get agented for the first time. So I really saw that with my show at Bush Overflow. They wanted me to be in it. And I was just like, okay, sure. And I wrote this play and I was like, I guess I'm in it. And then I paused and I was like, why am I in it? One, I'm also not that good of an actor. Like, burgers I'm like good at because you'll see it's like me, but like, I'm not an actor. Like, there's people that train and want to do this. Like, they dream of doing this. And so I could give the amazing Reese Lyons, who played the role, her first ever main stage debut. She's now cast in an Amazon Prime show. I mean, fuck Amazon, but she's in a really cool show. And she's then done voiceover for this like Marvel thing. And that came from her talent, but she got spotted by having 2 major runs on that thing. When I'm making, and I also got an opportunity, right? Because I wrote a main stage show, but then got me this next thing, then this next thing. But if I took the role, then it's only me that's benefiting, right? And that's boring. I've done that. So that is really the main reason. But a more artistically interesting reason and less pious reason is that it's just more fun. Like, I can imagine more things when I'm not doing it. So I've got a show that is opening literally, like, I think 4 days when I get back. It's just on for 2 days. And it's called I'm Bored, Someone Passed Me the Duct Tape. And it's about 2 trans girls that take their doctor hostage because they're not speeding up with the hormones to give them to them. And it's stupid, like it's really silly. Oh, well, I don't want to be in there. Like, that's not me. But I get to make another thing where and we get to cast 2 other black trans people that have never had an acting credit. And because this opportunity is only on for 2 days, it's the perfect chance for someone that hasn't really acted but needs a credit to come in. And who knows what will happen with them, you know? And I just think that's way more interesting, and it goes back to the archive, which is what we started with. It means that hopefully in 40 years there's these trans people that are working in the arts, and what's joining them is that their first opportunity was like working on one of my shows. And that feels really special and like a privilege and exciting. And I think that is what being an artist is about. It's like, how do you stay excited by it? And I was getting bored by being in my own stuff. And this feels really, I get these jobs now and I'm like, this is worth being a bit tired for, because I can go, wow, so I'm doing a show at the Royal Court, which is like a big theatre in the UK, and it's a main stage show, like this kind of main stage. And I'm only casting drag queens, drag kings, drag things in like the Royal Court. I'm so excited by that. I'm excited to make the show and make good art, but I'm excited that all these people that don't even know what equity minimum means, don't even know what a union is, don't know what Spotlight, which is our acting services, are about to be on a stage for like 8 weeks at a main stage theatre, and we're going to make theatre. Like, that's really cool. And I think you can only start thinking of those things when you take yourself out of them. Yeah. Also, I'm more anxious in the pandemic. I don't want to be on stage. It's harder. Writing's a lot easier. I don't know why they like put the writer up to this like high thing. Performers work way harder for way less money. It's a way harder job. I want to do the easier job.
You want to be in charge?
Yeah, I want to be. Yeah, exactly. And they treat writers very well.
Well, thank you so much. This was a delight. I loved this.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you all for being here, for sharing in this conversation. So,
thank you. Thanks so much, Diane.